Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Tuan and I'm one of the organizers of this event. And today's panel is about generative art. And I'm very honored to welcome the moderator, Diane Drubay, Ivona Tau, Flygohr and Ciphrd.
Thank you, Tuan. Welcome, everyone. So today's topic is generative art. If you don't know about generative art, hopefully you will understand everything after this session. But first of all, we will talk about art, we will talk about digital art, and we will talk about people's journey into a new community and a new space. So I think it could be really nice to actually hear more about your personal journey and how you actually started your career and what generative art means for you. Flygohr, shall we start with you?
All right, let's see if this works. I have a background in traditional art and illustration, so this generative art thing, this coding and like creating, generating on the spot stuff that wasn't there before, it's fairly new to me. It was all opened for me by TEDs, the blockchain we are on. I think we will get more deep into that later. But basically, approaching this new technology allowed me to explore new forms of art and, yeah, really try my hand at something that I wasn't really, not good at, not familiar with, and yeah, it was really something new for me.
Maybe you can talk about what you do as an artist, how you started as an illustrator. And
yeah, so I always used to draw since I was a child. I always got some kind of entrepreneurial spirit. I was selling comic books to my classmates in elementary school. And my dream was always to become an illustrator. And yeah, I pursued that, and I started working professionally while I was in high school. I do digital art, illustration. I use a graphic tablet. Yeah, I used to create art for clients. My background is more commercial. And later, when I discovered blockchains and NFTs, I started doing stuff more for myself, and I started creating yeah, very different types of artwork. It's really, yeah, back me up here.
well, what is quite amazing is that you have in front of you three artists doing today digital art, but they are coming from three different backgrounds. And yeah, Flygohr is an illustrator now doing NFTs, but we will talk more about that. Ivona Tau, she has a background in artificial intelligence, and she's actually finishing her PhD, and you have been experimenting as well with GANs models, and now minting beautiful landscapes and even more. So can you tell us more about your journey?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the intro. So I actually come from a very mixed background, as on one hand side, as mentioned, I do artificial intelligence research, so I've been coding for more than 10 years now, I guess, now finishing my PhD, and I have a master's in mathematics, which seems very technical and non-creative until you get into the depths of never-ending dimensions and weird shapes going for different kinds of transformations. So you really need a lot of imagination to study maths. But this life kind of was parallel to my interest in photography that I also did since 18 years old. And I really was fascinated at first by analog photography and shooting film. And I did that as kind of a different life, shooting concerts and doing different projects, until a few years ago when I discovered that actually AI and generative networks can be used for creative purposes, and especially being trained on my photography, which was like a perfect intersection. So this is where I discovered that there's this completely new field for me that I just started doing. And yeah, I've been I've been since then in the NFT space as well, published several quite popular collections, and yeah, really been fascinated with generative art since.
I guess we will be, thank you for the intro. I guess we will be talking about different things that you might not know. So if you have any questions, if you want to ask directly the panelists, or if you want us to talk about also one term, feel free to ask questions. Feel free to just stop us and move the discussion in another way. It's totally fine. But let's keep on introducing our panelists. Ciphrd. Ciphrd is an artist, but is also the founder of FXH. I will let you introduce your journey in this beautiful space.
Thanks for the introduction. Nice to meet you all. So I guess my journey started when I was doing video games. Well, developing video games as a young child. And video games have this similar approach to computational design than generative art has. And I was basically coding little universes and iterating on them and having just fun doing some code. And a while ago I started, a few years ago I started to stop having the user interact with the environment. I have the environment interact with itself and exist by itself. And it kind of rejoined my passion for biology and studying microorganisms. And I started to get really deep down into this artificial life field, which is quite interesting and quite deep, and there's a lot to do in there. And also, yeah, as a concept, it's really interesting to explore it. And so I think my journey into generative art was made through artificial life and through the discovery of systems that have autonomous behaviors. And I got addicted to that. I got addicted to the process of being the god of a little universe and having it respond to yourself, because that's what happens. You create something and then it sort of talks to you because it has some autonomous behavior. And yeah, I like doing that. And yeah, just maybe as a little introduction to FX, what brought me to...
Well, maybe before, just... Sorry, just a question, because I don't know exactly who you are and you know what we should explain a little bit better. Shall we talk about blockchain? Do we need an explanation here? Do we need an explanation about Tezos? Do we need an explanation about NFTs?
Yes.
Everything?
Yeah, short. Well,
Short.
that would be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but just short. So it's interesting to hear this different understanding of what these things are.
So yeah, because our panelists actually mentioned these few words. So before jumping into generative art, let's explain quickly. Blockchain is a decentralized technology. Tezos is a public blockchain protocol, which has been actually having this beautiful community of artists blooming last year, thanks to a platform called Higetnunk, which was actually giving space and access to the blockchain to everyone, thanks to the very low barrier entrance, very low barrier fee. So it was very inclusive, while other blockchain can be quite exclusive and very expensive. Also, the low carbon footprint of Tezos is making it, is actually attracting quite engaged artists and communities. And so we all started on Higetnunk last March, and a big community of passionate and engaged and artists actually wishing to experiment and to use this new place as a laboratory for artistic practice all came together. I haven't introduced myself, but I'm Diane Drubay, and I'm taking care of art and culture for the Tezos ecosystem. And yeah, Tezos is definitely the place where artists are thriving and exploring new ways of experimenting. And that's why it's good to talk about art, and today especially to talk about generative art. Because, yeah, is it a trend? Is it a new art practice? What is it? That's actually the question of this panel. We have the chance to have Ciphrd with us, who actually founded FXH, the platform of generative art on Tezos, which is actually now facing art blocks, and even above art blocks, so the equivalent on Ethereum. It is definitely a trend, but it's definitely also a new way to produce art. And I'll let you the stage, if you can tell us about what is FXH and how everything started.
Yeah, sure. So maybe as an introduction, I can explain to you why I built this tool in the first place. So basically, when you're a generative artist, it's very hard to release your work in the real world. There are not so many occasions or opportunities to do that. You need to know the right people, and you need to do a lot of work. And I had this work on my computer, and I was like, okay, I want to release this. Do I need to go through all the steps that I did before? It's quite exhausting. And I knew a little bit about art blocks. I looked into it, realized, well, it was on Ethereum, so the entry cost was really high, not mentioning the not really efficient blockchain that is Ethereum. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to build my own tool on Tezos because I stand with what Tezos stands for, actually. And so I built FX, and I built it to cover my needs in the first place, not especially knowing that it will have disinterest in the community. But the idea is that artists are publishing a block of code, and the system gives the block of code some randomness, and the code needs to process this randomness to create an output that fits into a collection. That's the rough idea. And yeah, I built FX with this idea of being it open to the community, to follow Iket Nunketos. That was like really changing for our community of artists. And I wanted to bring that to generative art as well. And yeah, people started to gather, and we started to build a nice community, and it's nice to have that, and we have great plans for the future.
Thanks. So what's generative art? I'm coming from a museum background, and generative art is actually being made by Herbert Frank, by Vera Molnar, from the 60s, 70s. It's mostly one edition being made through the computer and through mathematics and through algorithm. But I know that with the new generation, generative art is actually something else. Of course, the roots are the same, but then the way to present it, the way to produce it, the way to buy it and to collect it is actually different. So can we have your own perspective on what is generative art and what is actually making them, what are the main components or the main characteristics of generative art for today? Flygohr, do you want to start?
All right, so for me, as I said, I come from a very commercial illustration background. And for me, the goal was always to make a finished product for a client. The client would tell me, like, this is what I want. I would draw it, and I would deliver, and I would get some feedback. And that was really a process focused on the result. So what I found out while I started learning to code and to get into generative art myself, I found myself really more invested in the process of creating the actual algorithm, the actual, I'm a noob here, I'm really new to the thing, these are the experts around me. But yeah, for me, it's really more about the process of coming up with a system that creates something based on your instructions, but you did not create yourself. That's it for me.
Is it the same for you, Ivona?
Yeah, so actually what's interesting is I'm coming from AI background, and with generative art traditionally we usually had a set of predefined rules, and the role of the creator and artist was to set boundaries and kind of give instructions to the computer, the machine. But now as the models get better and better, and now we have those sophisticated optimization algorithms that actually run machine learning and AI, what happens is that those rules actually become really fuzzy. And you don't even have such strict control of the process, and more so over the boundaries. So this interaction with the model happens in a very different but also very interesting way, because you curate inputs and you curate the task, you curate the goal for the model, for the algorithm, but you don't really say what are the boundaries, what's supposed to happen, and you just see what happens. And of course, it also depends whether you're doing long-form generative art or you're curating the outputs yourself, how this process will look like later, because in some parts, artist sometimes is also a very important part of deciding what is the finished work, what is the finished piece. And with generative art, we usually want to have this flexibility of having a lot of possibilities and having each single output of the generative code to be meaningful and to tell a story. So for me, it was a very difficult but also exciting task to go from straight AI training and creating the outputs to actually allowing this set of boundaries to coexist. So yeah, this is a lot of new perspectives coming into play. So I believe that as those algorithms get better and better in the future, we might also see generative art becoming perhaps something even more different. It started with a set of rules that were just not even used with a computer, but set of rules: draw a line on this wall, draw a circle, so you don't even need a computer for that. But as we go and those rules become even fuzzier, even more complicated, it's really interesting to see what will happen in the future and how the definition might get redefined.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and I like the idea of seeing generative art also in parallel with the computers that are evolving. The technology is evolving, and so the art is evolving with the technology. We have access to much more computational power than before, which gives us artists more freedom, because now we don't have to think so much about the technical constraints. We do, but less than before. And the years to come are going to be really interesting, because technology will eventually evolve. It's actually evolving with blockchains, and we see the effects on art, but it's going to evolve way more, and it's a field that's amazing to explore.
And setting up the rules, like I actually believe by setting up FXH, you actually provided a space for experimentation to so many artists, but you also set up some rules. You actually decided a few things, and you are revealing a few other things step by step. So how do you feel about that? Do you actually get some feedbacks from artists, or do you just experiment and then you let something, you put something live and then you remove it if it's not being used? Like, how do you?
Yeah, the great thing about having such an engaged community is that the artists love to give us some feedback about what they would like to see on the platform, and we don't really need to find the ideas ourselves. They are given to us by artists, and we just have to follow what they ask us, basically. But there's also like this sort of guardian role that we have, because there are some technical constraints with the generation of images, what's possible with JavaScript, things like that, and we kind of have to put some limits, mostly technical limits, rather than things that we don't want to do because we just don't want to do them. Most of the time, these are technical issues. But as time goes, we are slowly able to overcome those issues and bring more feature to the users and the artists, collectors as well. And yeah, it's a perpetual feedback between the community and the team.
And don't you think it's also the reason why this is such a trendy art form and art practice, because it is constantly evolving and actually following the different new technologies. Like lately, everyone is using Midjourney or DALL-E 2, but I suppose each time there is a new technology or a new tool coming up, like people are testing it on FXH. But that's just a supposition. Why is it actually such a trend?
It's hard to tell, actually. I think one point is that we've all grown with computers now. Well, most of us have grown with computers, and even older people have become accustomed to computers. And so now that some art is being released in this new form, we are intrigued by it. I mean, it must play a role. And also, as artists, as I mentioned before, it's quite an addictive process to do this, because you're evolving with the output in parallel. So it's really specific thing to do. It's nothing that I've done before as an artistic practice has come close to the feeling of doing generative art. And maybe this feeling passed down to the viewers in a way, and they feel it as well. Honestly, I don't know, but for sure it does something.
I can add that there is also a lot of adrenaline rush as an artist when you release on FXH, because you're just uploading code. You're not uploading final works. You're uploading the code, and you're never sure if it's going to work the way it worked in tests and what's going to get created. There are technically infinitely many possibilities how the outputs can look like, and you never know what gets created. So it's just so fascinating to see how people go on the platform and mint your algorithm, and then they end up with a lot of beautiful, or hopefully beautiful works. And yeah, there's a lot of excitement in that.
And it's on a blockchain, so if you make mistakes, they are forever.
Yeah, that's a nice point. And because it stays forever, the community, and because there's this part of randomness, they start to give some other life to your collection. Like you release something, you don't know what it's gonna look like, and suddenly the community has some preferences in the collection. They are starting to message you about their preferred piece. There are sub-communities forming, and it's quite a new way of engaging with a community as an artist, which is, again, nice to have.
I actually really like the fact that we talked about randomness and uncertainty. We are definitely living in a world where uncertainty, like not being certain about the future, is a new rule. But when it is actually being applied to art, it is becoming randomness, and it's becoming the capacity to let go and to actually let the artwork being alive and have its own soul and its own direction. I actually feel that artists on FXH are having a totally new behavior, a new interaction, a new relationship with what they are producing, and giving also more space to the minters, to the buyers, and basically because you will not own what people will mint, you really let go of everything. And that's something that was totally not the case in the rest, like in the previous art world, in the traditional art world. Like normally when you actually create a painting or one unique edition of generative art, you really decide what you produce. You decide what you show, you give a title, and then you can talk a lot about the concept, about the colors, about the shapes. With a series, you actually talk about X editions. You talk, your discourse is becoming really, really different. I'm actually really curious about how do you conceptualize something that you don't see, something that you cannot plan?
Yeah, definitely well said that generative art is a lot about this balance, this dance between randomness and control. And the thing is that as a generative artist, and even especially as an AI artist, you don't have the complete power over what gets generated. So we have power over showing some directions. But with GANs, for example, you just show your collection of photographs, but you never know if what features will get collected, what features model will decide are the most important ones, or are the most illustrative of the concept. So I like to also compare that to like a very, very sophisticated watercolor technique. You can choose some colors, but you can never choose the direction of the flow. And it really works this way, that you start with a concept, you start with an idea, but you really want to leave a lot of the space around the concept and really like to leave the space for the algorithm to explore and to also be part of this explorative journey. So in a way, it's a very different, it's a shift in perception of how we think about creating, as it's also that we find a bit about ourselves in the process.
So she make it sound like it's easy to just let a software do what it does, but it's really, at least it was for me, it was really difficult to, I mean, I would never do that watercolor thing where you just let the color do what you want. Or I wouldn't have been able to before starting to code. I have some kind of OCD. I like to have my hard disk, everything in its place. My drawing software needs to have all the brushes in the same place and stuff like that. So leaving some bit of code, which I'm not really good at writing, do some stuff on the web page is really difficult.
It was difficult for all of us in the beginning. Really, when you first open some code and try to write some code, it's nothing natural.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, yeah, it's not easy, yeah, sorry. I sounded wrong, but I mean, it's a very sophisticated process that, well, if you have OCD, it's also scary. So for me, it was also very scary because I don't have influence. I cannot tell to algorithm, make this thing bigger, smaller with AI. It's like, it creates what it wants. I can punish for something. I can add penalty, saying, no, I don't like this, I like this. But it's just pointing out the examples. And it's also then going back to the first step of curating the inputs that are essentially the most important part and trying to tweak the algorithm, but it's like playing in the darkness because you change one knob and something happens and you don't really see what's the direct correlation, so you have to discover that yourself. Okay, if I tweak this knob and this one a little and I push back this one, something good happens, but sometimes something bad happens, and it's also a fun process, but yeah, definitely quite scary when you want to have full control.
Yeah, the AI thing is even more scary than what I actually do, because I actually write all the code. I can see all the lines, but what she does is like having a black box with stuff you don't really know what's inside. She just can like direct some of the output, but yeah, really scary.
Well, I'm actually wondering, what is the power and the potential of all these new tools that are coming up? I know that you spent, a lot of time training your model, and exactly like, people working on doing generative art, they are spending a lot of time working on their codes. But now we see a lot of tools actually making this even more easy. Accessible. Everyone is starting to use GAN models to do some AI art. Do you feel that some similar tools are actually coming with generative art? And if so, yeah, what do you think about it?
I think these tools already exist. I'm thinking, for instance, about visual programming. Thinking about VVV, Touch Designer, softwares like that, where you don't actually write some lines of code, but you connect boxes that interact together. And it's, in the end, the exact same computational process for the computer, but in terms of design thinking, it's really different. And you prototype stuff really faster. You may actually rather like that.
I've tried that, but it still requires that bit of logic that I don't have.
Yeah, at first there is, for every new tool there is some logic that we don't have, and yeah, there is some, we need to learn that, but it's easier like to get to a point where you can a little bit control what you do with some tools with visual programming than it is with code, where you actually have to learn lots of stuff until you get to a point where, okay, I can put two circles next together and I know how to do it precisely.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a lot of time. I actually started looking into code like 2 years ago. I only started like doing something that they would consider like basic stuff only recently in the last few months or something.
Would you have maybe one advice for people in the room who never did generative art or never actually studied even to think about it? Like, what will be the first step or easy tutorial to follow, or what would be the first advice?
Well, I would definitely advise to just think about what you want to do and do not care about learning the basics because it's boring. And the way I try to learn is always imagine something that I really want to create, and just start digging and asking people, and then as you create this one piece that you're really fascinated about, then the whole process will be so much smoother, and yeah, you'll learn a lot. And of course, the community, just asking questions. I have been so amazed by how generative artists really share the insights. And we see that a lot with the research community as well, that so many models are made open source. Everybody's just eager to share their code, to show what's in there. And it also might be a very great tool for learning. You just find something you really love, and then you dig into the building components. You don't understand something, you ask about it, you Google that, but really work on examples that you love, because it will help with the passion for generative art.
This is beautiful as a human community with the open source community, especially in generative art, but also in code in general, is amazing. This is maybe one of the biggest source of information on the world. Like when you need something, basically somebody already tackled the problem and did it in a way that you can get inspiration from to create new stuff. And it's beautiful that it's growing this fast because it's open, because everything is open in the first place. Not everything, but a lot is open.
Yeah.
Can you say a word about text to art? Because I saw some tools on the net and I was really a little bit scared about it.
Yeah, and
you can just say, do this and you see the picture and it looks like that somebody of you would have painted it.
Yeah, I can answer that because, yeah, I mean, lately a lot of people have been fascinated with text-to-image techniques and creating images with AI by prompts. And first of all, there's just so much more to AI art than just that, and there are just so many techniques being developed. The one thing to realize is that those models have been trained already by people who have resources, because to train such a model currently, you need to have like terabytes of memory. They've been trained on like whole internet. So everything that has been posted, images, texts, it's only the biggest companies that can do that. And it of course provides some constraints, because those models, while they were trained on such massive data sets, there is some similarity in the outputs that will get produced. And there are some artists who are just amazing at finding their own style regardless that, but it's not easy. So a lot of people just try something. I want a spaceship in the shape of avocado, and they're like, oh, I'm an artist now. But I would also argue that this accessibility of AI tool is a good thing, because we have to move forward from the novelty of, wow, this work was created with computers, so it's cool, to, okay, what does this work say? What's the story? And it's the same thing that happened for photography. It's just one click, everyone can do that. But does it mean that photographers don't exist, or photography is not art? No, and it all
no, don't you have a beautiful story to share with us? Maybe one drop that you haven't missed, and then you actually own a beautiful piece that you will never sell.
Okay, I could tell how I found FX Hash, because just weeks before I found Sam Zhao from Berlin, and he had a very fascinating NFT on Object, and so I followed his Twitter, and so some weeks later he said, oh, I'm going
Oh, that's, thank you. It's okay.
I'm lucky I got 4.
Oh, but yeah, the Sam drop was quite something emotionally, because it popped out of nowhere for me. I was like, wow, someone posted something on the platform, it's wow. And Punvir dropped something before, the Punvir face, which is the first non-team FX token. And it was, but he was talking to me in the meantime, so I knew about it. And Sam was the first to drop something out of the blue. And wow, it was such a nice feeling. So you were in the first, I think, collectors of the platform. Okay.
So my advice is engage on Tinder, Twitter, okay? Twitter, and if you spend, don't spend hours, maybe 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes, and just by chance, interesting stuff will come along. Like just recently, I learned about Decon, which is a new gallery platform, but you will find out yourself.
Thank you for sharing. Are there any other stories? It's always because it's basically a human journey. It's more about people than about the rest. I feel in this space, and we all started to connect really at a human level, even if we never met each other. We all started to create huge things at an international level without really knowing what we were doing. And that's really the beauty of it. Any other stories to share? Yeah, thank you.
It's the other way around. Like, I have no generative art NFTs, but I was super fascinated by the technology NFTs. So I have NFTs like this stupid profile pictures and so on. So I have them. I made the first step. I have my wallet. I have some ETH, for example, in it. Maybe some other currencies later. So this was my first step with all these like processes and also like communities, Twitter and so on. And I think there are like some similarities, and many people in the before like PFP area and also like things like with brands and so on, they are now looking into other parts. So a friend of mine was in New York City last week and at the NFT NYC, and these people also started with like PFPs, and now they are also going for like Jesus, and we heard a lot of FX hash and so on. So talking about artworks curated and so on. So I think there's also people are evolving from just looking for the technology into the art space as well, right? So there's also maybe some onboarding that has to be happen there
Yeah.
to make the market bigger also. Yeah.
Definitely. It's a very, very good point. And I actually feel that NFTs and art as NFTs are definitely creating a bridge between tech and art. Like so many times artists and museums, galleries, collectors, like they really try to create this bridge. It was always, some few things on the side. It was never really understood at a more global level. And finally, we can talk about tech and art in the same sentence, and it's not actually creating any strange faces. And we really, like the market and the understanding of the technology really got accelerated thanks to NFTs. NFT is just one thing. We should really much more talking about blockchain and about Web3, but it's such a beautiful first step to actually start to engage with the technology and start to own part of this technology as well. Start to experiment on this technology. It's so easy, and it's really for everyone. And art is speaking to everyone, and that's also why it's so important to have a very diverse and very global community, so everyone can try it. It's definitely a beautiful journey. Do you have something to?
Yeah, maybe also I'll add that with regards to collectors, it's also a shift from traditional art where we used to be so separate and so isolated as artists from collectors. We just had galleries who represented us, and now there's this amazing thing happening that we get to have a direct contact and direct conversation with our collectors. And it works both ways. As an artist, I'm really happy to hear those stories, those emotions that get evoked by someone, what stories get reminded of, what memories they feel when they look at my work. And with traditional art, I feel that there have been so many more boundaries that are now just removed. So yeah, there's also this thing to cherish.
Yeah, definitely. Beautiful stories like collector artist in the same room. Like this was so difficult like before. Collectors, like really, really high collectors were speaking to very, very high artists, but then most of the time you were just not having any relationship. While now it's really very, very strong interactions, and even getting influenced by the collectors. It's a relationship. Do you have maybe some stories to share about that?
I mean, I've tried for 10 years to try to get my work out there into not even galleries, but like just to some exhibits, trying to meet people who was interested in buying it. But it was really difficult before NFTs, Web3. I didn't really have any networking before. Then after I got this beautiful community, I got to talk with all kinds of artists. Really grew on me.
Ciphrd?
Yeah, no, I feel you. Digital art especially is particularly difficult to showcase in the real world. And when NFTs made it possible to connect with collectors, it just made sense. And that's why it's the first, maybe one of the first really good use case of blockchains that affects worldwide, that affects people worldwide, because there's a real impact on the ability for artists to be paid for their digital work. And that's really great. And we'll see more of these use cases as the technology will evolve, but it's already great to have that.
And also, it's not about one collector collecting one piece. It's about multiple collectors collecting one series or one NFT being fractionalized. So this is also sharing the ownership and letting the price being lower, the price of the artwork being lower. So it's also making the artwork more affordable. I have some questions about prices here, because on FXH, on or so many NFT marketplaces, you see huge prices and way smaller ones. Like, what will be actually your advice when you start minting? In terms of edition, how big it should be in terms of prices? Do you have some advices?
It's a really difficult question, actually. First of all, regarding the number of editions and things like that, it kind of depends on the work itself. I think the first is to show the work, not thinking about the pricing, but as you want the work to be displayed for the next 100 years, because it's going to last out there. So it's really important to think about that. And pricing is really difficult. First of all, putting a price on its own work is daunting. I tried to write a little guide in the doc on FX to help people price their project, but it's something that's difficult, and we just have to say it, acknowledge that it's difficult for us to price our project, and don't put so much pressure on our shoulders for pricing our project wrong. And that's something that we try to advocate on the platform, because some collectors at some point were attacking artists for pricing the project wrongly, but that's because they don't know how hard it can be to price this, because when you are in the market for like 2 years, you know how it works, but when you just come in there, you have never sold anything, it's really hard to even think about putting a price on your work. And we learn. It's a learning process. I think we need to know that we will probably fail at first, even the second time, but eventually we'll know how to interact with the community, how to feel about the price of the work based on the market, based on previous stuff, and yeah, it's a learning process.
I totally agree that it's definitely a learning process and experimentation, and you can try different things. So, for example, when I did my first NFT back in March last year, it was one of one. at 1 TES. It then resold at 100, 1,000. So it's you grow with your work, you grow with collectors, and I would also say don't be afraid to leave some arbitrage for collectors, especially at first when you're not sure about what's your market. But as you grow with your fan base, collector base, you also get more opportunities to try different things. And it might also be changing. So your popularity or your presence in the space might be growing and might be slowing. So you also need to be mindful of that fact to always grow. But whether this growth is slower or quicker, it's something that is really, really difficult to assess. And the mistakes will definitely happen. And they happened for me as well, and for everyone, I guess. So just try to learn that. And yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes. As you can probably, well, it's if a price, I would recommend pricing it too high maybe if you're not sure, than too low on the other hand, as well, as every piece is valuable to you. And I sometimes prefer for it not be sold if it's so valuable to me than to have it like underpriced, because yes, it's also important to know that this information is always on the blockchain, everything is recorded, so the price also tells some kind of story that you want to keep there. So yeah, it's complicated, and I don't have answers, and all my advice is contradicting itself.
So I'd like to emphasize the don't price your work too low. It might be tempting because, as we said earlier, there's a lot of people coming into this new thing. There might be some competition and some fierce competition as well. But yeah, believe in what you're doing and price your work accordingly.
What is too low? What is too high?
Yeah, like don't sell your creative work for pennies if you put in a lot of work.
Totally. So, what do you think about the, object for object, Tezos for Tezos?
They are amazing. I just love those events.
So just to give you a little bit of background, if you don't know these events, it's celebration by the community. So basically for a few days, few hours, 1 week, the community is inviting everyone to mint NFTs at large editions for very, very small price. So for instance, 500 editions at 0.5 TES. So the goal is really to make everyone, to invite everyone to become an art collector, but also to invite everyone to collect everyone else. So it could be very famous, very newbie artist. Everyone will be collected by everyone else. Do you have something else to add about that?
It's a great way of connecting with and knowing new artists.
Yeah. Yeah, because everyone is using the same hashtag, so very easy to also review what is being produced. So it's a super good visibility platform as well. Definitely. And it's just so much fun to collect because it's so addictive to collect. So when these kind of things are happening, like every evening, I'm just collecting so many.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to add is like Ciphrd here should add a warning on his platform because it's way too addicting. I mean, I spent most of my savings.
I've spent a lot of time collecting on my platform.
Yeah.
So we've met this issue in December for the first time. Suddenly there were some copy mint stuff that was popping out of nowhere. And we took the decision to just close minting on the platform, disable. And we built a system where with a verification system basically, and unverified users are like in a 3-hour waiting pool during which it's not possible for collectors to mint their work, which gives time for the community to report the pieces and gives time for the moderation to apply on-chain actions to block those tokens. So it's a little bit against Web3 because we have a team that guards the community. But on the other end, it was the only way to protect the community because scammers are very good at pretending to be some other artist. And it's for now the only way to safely protect the community.
One thing with code on blockchain is that you can really spot who's copying someone else just by opening their files and looking at their code.
Sometimes it's a little bit tricky because they copy the ID, and that's where the line is kind of blurry because like it's not the same code. We can recognize that it's not the same code, but we can definitely recognize the same colors, the same shapes, the same sort of randomness and things like that. And it's really hard to put a line where, okay, this is acceptable and this is not. So we try to, it's case by case basically. And luckily, we don't have so many projects posted. It's not like on TIA where there are like maybe, I don't know how much there are, but 8,000 a day, for instance. It's impossible to moderate that. Luckily, we can apply some moderation, but it's a case by case and it's difficult to moderate.
And with the growth of FX hash, it's probably going to get difficult and more difficult and more difficult.
Stop it. But no, it's great, and we'll grow the team if needed. Yeah, but I think, yeah, the community like sort of organized itself in reporting the tokens that have some possibility of copy mint, and now we have way less work to do ourselves, and collectors are like scrolling through the platform and recognizing pieces and, oh, I collected something similar, it's weird. They just report and then it's easier for us to sort it out. So it's great to have an engaged community in maintaining the platform.
And it's definitely the magic of this community. And that's, it was the same on Hiketnunk, it is the same on Teia. It is thanks to the community constantly checking and reporting that scams can be avoided. Of course, you can add some tech barrier, but the community will actually always play a very, very strong role. So let's talk about community, because it's definitely about people, it's definitely about community, it's definitely about creating a group of engaged people. There is something happening now with the community, because Web3 is about community engagement. You will see that it's about community building, community engagement, engaging with people in different ways, and even in curating an exhibition. Can you tell us more about the vote for this exhibition, Unblock Gaudi?
Yeah, so Unblock, who made this exhibition, is made a voting system for FX hash members. The idea is that when you try to organize live events, you need to do some sort of curation. Like you decide, okay, what goes in the exhibition, what doesn't. And it's a little bit hard when you're an open platform to take this decision, and it's normal that it's hard because it goes against what we are trying to do. And this initiative is amazing because the people that collected pieces on FX were able to pick a project that they like so that it can be displayed at the exhibition. And we are going to try to make this model something more recurrent for any of our exhibitions, because we don't want to be this layer that decides you can go there and you can't. We would like the community to decide that eventually.
And maybe not, why not having a DAO actually curating exhibitions for everything that we do?
That's the long-term goal, yeah.
Mine as well. Yeah, I know that it's over an hour already. Any questions so far? Yeah, if you want to start.
Yeah, I'm the same like him with the PFPs currently, but following Zenica or presumably Medici, it's always nice to see the generative art, and it gets more and more interesting for me. And currently with the bear market, I think a lot of people are focusing more now on the high quality stuff. So how do you experience the current bear market? We were
talking about pricing. Currently on the whole NFT space, everything is just, well, either 0 ETH or just 0.01 ETH and not the 0.4 ETH or 1 ETH minting prices at the moment. So how do you experience it currently on Tezos or on
There's no bear market on FXhash.
Yeah, honestly, it's doing great. We don't have so much issues. I think the market is starting to sort out what's valuable, what has meaning, and what doesn't. And luckily, we are on the good side, it seems, and the people seems to like what we do. And it's, yeah, I think it was needed for the ecosystem because lots of projects were abusing the trust of collectors, mostly newcomers, by creating what we call cash grabs. And I think it's important that the market sorts this out because we are trying to build a future for, I would say mankind, but it's a bit too much, but we are trying to build a new future for the future. And yeah, and we need this to be sorted out.
Yeah, so I actually might, I will agree with you that on Ethereum, yeah, the sales are really slow. So my collections are really quite well received on Tezos and on FXhash and on Object. So there is definitely a change or difference that is there, and which is good for Tezos, of course. But that said, I would say that having a slower time is actually good, especially for artists and for people who are here for the long term, because in those times, the majority that is in for the wrong reasons usually just quits. So all those rug pulls, cash and grabs, etc., they just get sorted out. And also in the previous bear markets, it is actually where the most cool stuff got built. As you have more time, you have less FOMO, you have less hype, you can actually sit down and work. So we all can use this time for inspiration and for creation.
And just to add, if you actually check the numbers of transactions, if you compare all the chains, only one is going up. And that's it's just because the community is passionate, really. And FXhash and generative art is just yeah, what people want to collect, and they don't care about the currency, to be honest. It's and yeah, as you said, it's good to slow down, and it's something that FXhash is teaching everyone. There is some time when you cannot mint, and that's actually good, so people can really think about what they are preparing.
Yeah, and to come back on the yeah, the community that is taking the beer market pretty good. I was like looking at the prices at some point, and I was a little bit scared, you know. And I went on our Discord, and I saw people in the Discord, like in price discussion on our in a channel on our Discord, and they were laughing about it. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, no problem, we'll get over it. And you know, like we were all in this together, mostly having fun. And this is what's great about this community, is that we're all having fun together. And yeah, it's, I was happy after that.
You had a question?
Yeah, so I had actually a chance to be working with a couple of galleries and traditional auction houses, and it is really inspiring to see this shift of perception or even openness to just a little bit of NFTs. And what I've noticed is that most galleries and museums and auction houses, they don't want a revolution, they want an evolution. And they are really happy to embrace at least part of this shift, to experiment with this new medium, to open up their doors, but not to have it, you know, run over and have a completely changed paradigms. So I would say that there is also this thing that Web3 allows us is to connect to those curators. That has not been possible. As you mentioned, it has been so difficult for to be showcased in traditional galleries, museums before, but now when you connect through Web3, you can actually get access to a lot of very influential people and to even get exhibited at very high-end places. So there is definitely a shift to opening up. There is a lot of caution, I've noticed as well. And also, I see that digital art is still treated like traditional art in a way that we wanted to show it in frames on TV screens. But with digital art being sometimes really immersive and really different kind of art, there's a lot about how should we show this art, how this experience can be different, and maybe it should not be compared to paintings. It's not just a moving image or still image or something that is shown on screens. It does not even have to be shown on screens. So there is a lot of potential for museums, and let's see how they embrace that.
Museums should get VR headsets too, like to see stuff in virtual reality.
And also, it's our work as platforms to make it easier for artists. I mean, we are kind of on the lucky side, I will say. It's easier for us because we sort of have a name now out there. But for all these new artists that don't have a name, we must make it easier for them to connect with galleries, to connect with museums. And that's also what's beautiful, because we are building communities together, we are artists together, and so it's easier for us to think about a better future for us. And it's in our duty to make it easier for everybody.
And you know, like museums are already collecting NFTs. Some museums are already commissioning artists to create digital art through NFTs. Museums are already planning NFT exhibitions and to acquire NFTs for their permanent exhibitions, permanent collection. But also they want to experiment with blockchain and Web3 a lot. And we have a research and development department or program engaging with museums, actually, so they can explore how to use Web3 for what they do. We talk a lot about community building, community engagement, through NFT ticketing, through data-driven art pieces, through NFT interactive installations. We talk a lot about curation DAO. We talk a lot about so many different things. Like, museums are really eager to actually test and try. Well, not every museums, definitely. You know, there is this huge diversity and variety of museums in the world, but the ones really having innovation in their DNA, they're already doing a lot. And some museums are already planning actually some drops. I think the next museum in Amsterdam will drop few NFTs like this week or next week, and many others. So it's definitely coming. It's it's just a new territory to explore, basically, and being able to engage directly with artists is something super exciting for them. Still at the beginning. We are still at the beginning, definitely. Any other question? Well, thank you so much. Thank you, you three. Thank you for collecting generative art. Thank you for your questions and sharing your beautiful stories. And yeah, let's have a drink.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.